bus was packed, with every seat taken and people standing shoulder to shoulder. The sound of the engine hummed loudly as it rattled down the road. At the next stop, a pregnant woman stepped on, holding her belly with one hand and the bus railing with the other. She looked tired, her face showing the strain of the day. She glanced around, hoping someone would offer her a seat, but no one did. Some passengers noticed her and quickly looked away, pretending not to see her struggle. The bus jerked forward, and she almost lost her balance, gripping the pole tightly to stay upright. The crowd stayed silent, their indifference loud in the moment. In the middle of the bus sat a man who had taken 2 seats for himself. He sat on one, and his bag rested on the other, as if it deserved a seat more than anyone else. He leaned back, scrolling on his phone, acting like he owned the space. The pregnant woman glanced at him, clearly hoping he would move his bag and let her sit. He looked up briefly, smirked, and then went back to his phone. "I paid for both seats," he said loudly, his voice dripping with arrogance. The other passengers looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The woman gripped the pole tightly, trying to stay balanced, while the man stayed relaxed, completely ignoring her struggle. At the back of the bus sat a young African boy, dressed in worn clothes that spoke of his struggles. His shoes were scuffed, and his school bag looked old and patched, but his eyes were kind and full of empathy. He had been watching the pregnant woman, noticing how she struggled to stand, while the others ignored her. Without a second thought, he stood up and walked toward her. "You can have my seat, ma'am," he said softly, his voice humble but firm. The woman looked at him, surprised and grateful. "Thank you so much," she said with a warm smile as she carefully sat down. The boy returned to the back of the bus, holding onto a railing to steady himself. His act of kindness stood out, and a few passengers looked ashamed for not helping. The racist man scoffed and muttered something under his breath, but the boy ignored his, focusing instead on doing what was right. The man watched as the young African boy gave up his seat and smirked. "Of course," he said loudly, "that's what they're good at, always ready to serve." His words were full of disrespect, and the passengers around him looked uneasy, but no one spoke up. The boy stood quietly, pretending not to hear, while the pregnant woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She glanced at the man, her face showing disappointment, but he didn't care. He leaned back in his seat, spreading out as if he owned the bus. His bag stayed on the seat next to him, untouched. "I paid for this seat," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was full of pride, as if that justified his actions. The bus continued down the road, but the air felt heavy with tension because of his attitude. As the bus approached a large office building, the pregnant woman signaled for her stop. Slowly she stood up and adjusted her coat, thanking the African boy again with a kind smile. The bus came to a halt, and she carefully stepped off, her movements watched by many eyes. A well-dressed man in a sharp suit was waiting at the stop, his face lit up with concern and care as he rushed over to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The passengers on the bus, including the racist man, stared in curiosity. Then the shocking moment arrived. The man looked directly at the bus and locked eyes with the racist passenger. His face turned serious and his expression was icy. It became clear, this was no ordinary man. He was the boss, and the pregnant woman was his wife. The realization hit the racist man like a ton of bricks. His smirk faded, and he sank into his seat, his arrogance replaced by pure fear. The next day, the racist man walked into his office as usual, confident and unaware of what was waiting for him. As he settled at his desk, an email popped up on his screen. It was a summons to the boss's office. His heart skipped a beat as he remembered the man from the bus. Nervously, he made his way down the long hallway. When he entered, he was greeted by the piercing gaze of the boss and the calm, yet firm, presence of the pregnant woman, his wife. "Sit down," the boss said in a cold tone. The man tried to explain himself, stammering about how he hadn't meant any harm, but the boss cut him off. "Your actions on that bus showed exactly who you are," he said. "We don't tolerate such behavior here." The man's face turned pale as the boss handed him a termination letter. "Kindness costs nothing," the boss added, his voice stern. The man walked out of the office, humiliated and filled with regret, realizing too late that his arrogance and prejudice had destroyed his future. As the bus continued its journey, the young African boy sat quietly, unaware of the ripple effect his small act of kindness had created. The pregnant woman, now safe and comfortable, couldn't stop thinking about his generosity. Later that day, she spoke to her husband, the boss, about what had happened. Inspired by the boy's selflessness, they decided to reach out to him. A few days later, the boy was invited to the boss's office, where he was met with gratitude and an offer of support. "You taught us all a lesson about kindness," the boss said with a warm smile. The boy, surprised but thankful, promised to always help others when he could. Meanwhile, the racist man, now jobless, was left to reflect on his actions. The story ends with the message that kindness, no matter how small, can change lives, while arrogance and prejudice only lead to regret. The camera fades out with the boy walking home, his head held high, and a voiceover reminding viewers, always choose kindness. It's what truly makes a difference. We hope you enjoyed this story. For more related videos, please subscribe our channel, and don't forget to like, share, and comment where from you watch.